Hello and welcome to the second recording session associated with the probability topics. In this session, we're going to focus in on the counting techniques. So the first question, as always, why study counting techniques? Okay, so in the previous one where we kicked off probability and the concepts around probability, we looked at sample spaces, all possible outcomes. We looked at something called events, which would be defining a characteristic and then mapping outcomes in the sample space to that characteristic. So it could have been we had a six-sided die we kept rolling, and we could say, well, all the outcomes that map to the characteristic of even numbers on a single roll of the die. And when we did that, we eventually got to probabilities, just really basic kickoff of what is a probability. And we said, okay, so if we say that the number of outcomes favorable to A divided by the total number of equally likely outcomes gives the probability of an event A. And so that's the classical definition of a probability. Now, the thing is, we need to be able to count the total number of possible outcomes in an experiment. We need both pieces of this. We need the number of outcomes favorable to a characteristic A or event A, and then we need to be able to count the total number of possible outcomes of an experiment. And, of course, for a six-sided die, that's fairly straightforward. There's six outcomes, so I can just look at it and go, yeah, well, of course, there's only going to be three even numbers in six outcomes. So there's going to be only two numbers associated with an event defined as greater than 4. But there's going to be a lot of times, as we'll see, that it's hard to count these things. And so to figure out what a probability is takes a little more, we need some more tools to be able to do that. The number of outcomes can become quite large and quite difficult to count, so we turn to counting techniques. 4 different techniques we'll look at here: the product rule, a tree diagram, which I'm sure you've had in the past. I'm going to guess you have. We're going to look into things called permutations and combinations. Product rule. If an operation can be performed in N1 ways, and if for each of those a second operation can be performed in N2 ways, then the total number of operations that can be performed is N1 times N2 ways. That's the total number. And I'll show you an example of this in a moment. If an operation can be performed in N ways, and if for each of these a second operation can be performed in N2 ways, and for each of those, a third operation can be performed in N3 ways, and so on in 3 different, so each kind of iteration, so to speak, has N sub I different ways that the next operation can be performed, then the total number of ways that could be performed would be the product of N times N1 times N2 times N3 times Nk ways as the total number of operations. That was a tongue twister. All right, let's just go to an example. And you'll hear me. I love to give numerical examples. I'm a real visual person. I prefer to think in terms of seeing an example and talking to a formal theoretical rule or definition that way. Okay, so product rule example. Suppose that a quality control inspector examines 2 manufactured items selected from a production line. Item 1 can be defective or non-defective. Item 2 can item 2. How many outcomes are possible for this experiment? Since N1, how many different ways can the first item picked? What can it be? It can either be defective or non-defective. So N1 is equal to 2. Defective or non-defective. Item 2 gets pulled after item 1. It also can be either defective or non-defective. So N2 is equal to 2. So the total number of outcomes in the sample space for selecting item 1 and then item 2 back to back, so to speak. The outcome list could be, I could pick item 1 could be defective, as could item 2. Item 1 could be defective, but item 2 is not defective. Item 1 is non-defective, but item 2 is defective, or I could pick 2 non-defective items off of the production line. So that's the product rule. Again, we're trying to figure out how many different possible outcomes are there in your sample space. Okay. In 1968, Michigan automobile license plates had 2 letters followed by a 4-digit number. In 1974, there were 3 letters followed by a 3-digit number. How many different plates were possible in 1968 and also in 1974? Note which one of these possible outcomes are larger. So you have had 2 letters followed by 4 digits in the 1968 license plates. So again, you could go back on the course Blackboard. You'll find the probability learning checkpoint solutions. You go ahead and pause, take a shot at this. Remembering now in this case, what we're talking about is we had 6 different operations, and you're looking at how many operations there are, how many different ways each operation could have to them. So one was 2 and 4, and then one is 3 and 3. Okay, so product rule is one thing. We're going to come back to that. We're going to use it a lot through the semester. Now let's take a look at tree diagrams. Configuration called a tree diagram can be used to represent pictorially all the possibilities calculated by the product rule. Example, a general contractor wants to select an electrical contractor and then a plumbing contractor from 3 electrical contractors and 2 plumbing contractors. How many ways can the general contractor choose subcontractors? So actually order doesn't matter in the sense that he or she, the general contractor, needs 1 electrical contractor and 1 plumbing. So I mentioned the general contractor might be a home builder or something like that. So let's take a look at a tree. So if he or she, the general contractor, picks a plumbing contractor, there's 2 different options, plumber number 1, plumber number 2. If that one picks plumber number 1, there's the 3 different electrical contractors. And so the pairings you would end up with would be plumber number 1 with electrical contractor number 1, plumber number 1 with electrical contractor 2, plumber number 1 with electrical contractor number 3, and so forth. This is the tree diagram to show you. It kind of is a visual representation of all the different combinations you can have. Observe that the product rule would have indicated the same since N1, the number of choices that the general contractor had for plumbers was 2, and there were 3 different choices for electrical contractors, or N2. And so N1 times N2 is, of course, 2 times 3. Just as a quick note with the tree diagrams, it could have been flipped, right? I mean, the general contractor only cared that they had 1 electrician and 1 plumber. Didn't care whether the electrician was picked first and then the plumber, or the plumber and then the electrician. And again, we're assuming equally likely. So electrician 1 had the same probability of being picked, or the same likelihood of being picked as electrician number 2, electrician number 3. All same skill set, all same certification, all same experience, all same prices. Everything about it was equal, is the assumption here. And likewise for the plumbers. So this had electrician picked, then the plumber. The outcome space is still the same. Okay, so there were 6 different outcomes possible. Another learning checkpoint. Suppose a firm is deciding where to build 2 new plants, one in the east and one in the west. 4 eastern cities, A, B, C, D, and 2 eastern cities, E and F, are possible locations. Equal chance for any of these cities. It doesn't matter whether it's New York, Boston, Philadelphia, and Washington, or Miami in there. You know, any of those 4 eastern cities, equal chance for equal. They were considered all equal. Similarly on the West Coast, San Francisco and Los Angeles, Seattle, whatever.